Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Do people share some scary stories? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was about 13, my mom and dad invited round our previous neighbors for the block of flats we lived in until I was 5 years old. Anyway, I'd been sent to bed but could still hear everyone talking about this and that until the woman neighbor said, "Hey, Diggsy's mum, do you remember when Diggsy used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that just moved into the floor above who have a 3-year-old son. He's complaining about the exact same thing Diggsy did." This creeped me out. I had no recollection of any of this, so the next day I asked my mom. Her first reaction was, "You don't remember?" Then she told me all about the weird stuff that used to happen. Footsteps up and down the hall, shit going missing and stuff. She said the final thing to happen was when she was listening to a record one day, and it started to slow down, like someone was holding a finger gently on the platter, till it finally came to a stop. My mom said she snapped at this point, and started shouting, "Will you leave us alone?" As soon as she said this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days I'm quite skeptical of such stories. But I believe my mom. The strangest thing is how I found out about it, from someone else 10 years later, experiencing something similar. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved those times, and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night, I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out toward the porch. Sitting on the front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood, and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me toward the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way, trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally, we got to the door. He unlocked it, swung it open, and said, "See, there's nothing." To this day, I've never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her that the police were coming, and she freaked out, grabbed the knife, and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. My university was bisected by a big lake with a bridge going across it with an island gazebo in the middle. One night I was walking down the side of the lake, about to cross the bridge to go to a dorm on the other side. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I noticed some kid in a gray-white hoodie with the hood up, walking across the section of the bridge on my side of the gazebo toward my sidewalk. I didn't think anything of it until I walked by a big tree that blocked my line of sight for a second. When I got past the tree, I happened to glance back at the bridge, and there was no one there. He couldn't have possibly walked off the bridge. He would have had to go right by me. If he had turned around, in the split second I could see him, he wouldn't have had any time to get all the way back to the island either. He was just gone. This gets creepier. About a year later, I was about to tell this story to my friend who had been abroad that semester. He'd never heard it, and before I even got to what I saw, he cut in with, "Wait, did you see a guy in a hoodie disappear?" "Yes, he's seen something like this freshman year. Weird." I hated walking across that bridge alone from there on out. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays, even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress, and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house, scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times, she would yell at us kids and call us kind things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by, she was watching out the windows. It was creepy, and we never went alone. One Halloween, one of the cousins dared us to trick-or-treat at her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus, I was going with the group. One of us rang the doorbell, and there was a lot of banging noises in the house suddenly, like doors slamming. When she answered the door, she had a severed head in her hands, and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop, and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later, my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of those rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home, which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents', and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground, which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived, by the way, but has a long scar across her neck. My wife and I buy our first house in February 2010. We immediately fell in love with it as soon as we laid eyes on it. It had everything we wanted and a few extras. For the first month, everything was great. Lots of painting and decorating, getting it just the way we wanted. Then weird things started to randomly happen. First it was small things, like things upstairs being moved, put in completely different rooms than where they belonged. I chalked it up to my wife just forgetting to put things back where they belong. The house also started to creak pretty loud. This is a fairly new house, so I just figured it was probably settling, as most new houses tend to do. One day, the wife and I were preparing dinner in the kitchen. Our stairs sit right next to the kitchen entrance, so any noises upstairs were clearly audible into the kitchen. I turned off the water at the sink, and as soon as I did, we both heard a cough. We had no kids, and no one was visiting. The windows were all shut, the television was not on. This sent the coldest chill down my spine, and I could feel the blood running out of my face. I looked to my wife, and she had too gone pale, and had this look of absolute fear. Someone was in our house, and they were upstairs. I quickly grabbed the sharpest knife I could find, and my wife called the police. I walked to the bottom of the steps, and stood silently and heard a loud pop, crack, just like the one I had always heard the house make. My hands were shaking, and my wife was whispering to the 911 operator, telling them we think we may have a robber in our house. The police arrived in minutes. Thankfully, they'd been patrolling nearby. The officer walks slowly up the stairs, gun drawn. He calls out, "This is the police. Is anyone upstairs?" No response. I'm right behind him, walking up the stairs. We look into the first bedroom and closet, empty. No one in the half bath either. The last room is my office, where I have my PC. No one in the room or the closet. I felt the tension ease away, and felt like a complete tool, making the officer search the house only to find nothing. We turned to walk out of the room, and right above us, creak. I just about shat my bricks. In my office closet, there's an attic access. The officer pulls the step sound and again calls out, "Is anyone up there? This is the police." No response. He turns on his flashlight and peeks his head up. He finds a man in his 40s kneeling there in the attic looking dead at him. Gun drawn, he tells the man to come out and put his hands behind his head. They arrest the man. He didn't say a word the whole time and would not look anyone in the eye. He was scruffy looking and had dirty clothes on. I and my wife were freaking out. I don't think either of us had fully gotten over it. After questioning the man in the police station, we found out that he was a homeless man who found refuge in the house while it was still in the market. He said the doors were unlocked, and so he stayed there. Apparently a realtor must have forgotten to lock the door after showing someone the house. He said that when people would come to the house, he would hide in the second floor attic. We bought the house, and this guy was living in it for a whole month without us even knowing. It really freaks me out just thinking about it. I would love to ask this couple if any food went missing while they were home, or did they notice anything like that? Because if the guy was in there for a month, sleeping right above you, it's pretty creepy. It's not supernatural, but it might be the creepiest one here. I don't have any way to verify whether this is actually a family story or whether it's an urban legend, but here. My family has lived in rural Nebraska since they emigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century, disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area, and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them, so as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods. So my aunt of some unknown number of greats, preceding her relationship to me, dies of some disease, and she gets buried in the family cemetery on the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral, the 2 dogs stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it, when a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave. They were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw, bloody, and mangled from where on the inside of the casket door they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. I'm a kid who likes his sleep very much, so my dad often had to wake me up as I slept through my alarm. He wakes me up the same way every time, by gently putting a hand on my shoulder, and then since I usually plead for 5 more minutes, he yanks the cover off and forces me up. So a few weeks ago, I had to get up very early to go play pickup basketball in the morning with some friends. I set my alarm the night before and went to sleep. My dad works very far away, so he often sleeps at work 2 or 3 nights a week. And that night, he wasn't sleeping at home, so I knew I had to get myself up. I eventually fall asleep, and I then wake up to a hand on my shoulder, murmur the usual 5 more minutes, and then I feel the covers yanked off me all the way off the bed. I shot up out of bed because it was a habit at this point, because this is when I knew my dad was serious. I opened my eyes, and it was pitch black in my room, and nobody was there. I looked around and saw nothing, just the lights on the clock that said 2:30 in the morning. I was a little more than slightly freaked out. I asked my mom in the morning if my dad had come home, but she said no, he had stayed at work. TL, DR. Something woke me up that effed up in the middle of the night and yanked all the covers off my bed, but nothing was there. Ever since I was really little, my family has always encountered really weird ghostly phenomena. The house we live in now has been the worst by far, however, with an almost constant stream of events happening. One of the stories that always freaks people out the most is that there was this little girl who knew our names and would approach us at all but different times. One night, I was asleep, and I heard a knocking on my door and a girl's voice saying, "Dean JJX? Open the door, let me in. I want to play. Open the door." At first I thought it was my sister, but as I woke up, I realized it was a much younger girl's voice. I sat there silently, freaking the fuck out, until it eventually stopped. But just as I was about to go haul ass into my sister's room, there was a relentless pounding on the 2 separate doors that enter my room, and this little girl screaming with laughter saying, "I know you're in there, let me in." After a few minutes, I just ended up yelling, "Stop it!" And then the pounding stopped. The next morning, my mom and my sister, who I hadn't told, were talking about the strange footsteps and giggling sounds all throughout the house, but neither of them had heard any of the pounding or me yelling. My mom remarried about 2 years ago. My dad died when I was 12, so she had been widowed for over 10 years. This new relationship was very whirlwind, with them meeting, dating, and getting married within 3 months. I don't know much about the guy, but my mom was happy, so I just tried to be supportive. She moved into her house in upstate Virginia and invited my fiancé and me to spend the weekend in her new home, getting to know her new husband. My mom's new home was pretty isolated. It sat on a few hundred acres of lovely rolling hills and was very picturesque. I was nervous about getting to know this guy, but I'm really trying to make the most of it. Over the course of our first day there, though, I felt more and more uneasy. I didn't think it was weird, just silly. My mom's new husband was being very welcoming and friendly. We were being made to feel very at home, yet I still couldn't shake this oppressive feeling. I finally chalked it up to me being more upset about my mom getting remarried than I was willing to admit to myself. We spent most of the day wandering around outside since I felt worse when indoors. That night, my fiancé and I showered together. When I turned my back to him, he stopped talking mid-sentence and asked, "What did you do to your back?" "Well, nothing. Why?" "You have a large bruise." I hopped out to try and see it in the mirror. I got back in and we finished showering in silence. Then it was off to bed. The one window in our room looked out over a pitch-black empty field, but I couldn't sleep until I hung something over the window. I felt sure that otherwise someone would watch us through the window. The next morning I had a complete meltdown. I woke up and just couldn't stop crying. I told my fiancé we had to leave. He tried to calm me down by telling me all the things I had been telling myself. My feelings of anxiety were just a result of seeing my mom with someone. The longer I spent with them, the easier it would become. But I just had to leave. It was only Saturday morning, and we were supposed to stay until Monday, but I felt completely hysterical. I knew I was on the verge of a panic attack, and my only concrete thought was that I had to stop crying long enough to make our excuses and get the hell out. We did. As soon as we were on the road, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I was even feeling embarrassed for my behavior, hoping I hadn't insulted my mom's husband by leaving early. Then my fiancé broke the silence. "That bruise on your back? Did you get a good look at it?" I had. It looked like some had touched in the middle of the back with fingers spread wide, with their hand at a tilt. I want to make completely clear, no one had touched my back the previous day, especially hard enough to bruise me. Cut to 3 weeks later. My mom comes to visit me. The entire time she's hounding me to come stay with her again. After finally trying to change the subject for the 5th time, I level with her. Before I'm even finished telling the story, her face is white as a sheet. She tells me she has been feeling the same way in the house. She hates it. She wants them to move as soon as possible. And the real kicker, her new husband's previous wife shot and killed herself right outside of the same field our room window overlooked. It was October 11, 2001, 1 month after 9/11. I was 14 years old and my grandfather died in his sleep, an empty bottle of whiskey at his bedside. I was devastated. He was the best grandpa, and I could tell I was his favorite. At his funeral, I remember standing at his burial ceremony. I was a little farther back than most of our family. I needed my space, and I was grieving hard. I remember closing my eyes, folding my arms, and burying my head into my jacket and crying. My mom then put her arm around me and cried with me. I felt her and heard her crying into my cheek, her voice muffled by my jacket. She let go, and I opened my eyes. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. My mother was standing 20 feet in front of me. Everyone was. I looked around and realized I was completely alone the whole time. I don't know who hugged me. Maybe it was my grandpa, or maybe I mistook my grandpa's voice for my mother's. To this day, I'm still confused and a little creeped out. This is a true story. I and my roommate, we'll call him Steven, had a pretty big party for his 30th birthday. There's cake, balloons, weed, and booze. We were having a great time when one of Steven's friends told him he'll give him $100 to go to the casino and gamble, but he has to gamble with him. My roommate says, hell yeah. They get ready to leave, so does everyone else, and the party ends. So eventually everyone leaves and it's just me. I clean up a bit, turn all the lights off in the apartment except my bedroom light, get into my nightwear, and sit on my bed to watch some TV. As I'm sitting there, I keep hearing this dragging noise, followed 15 seconds later by a light plop. This goes on for 25 to 30 minutes, but I don't see anything out of the ordinary, so I figure maybe it's something going wrong with the fish tank. I keep hearing this for 15 more minutes, thinking nothing of it, when some movement by my bedroom door catches my attention. One of the balloons we used for the party, a big number 0, is sitting at the threshold of my door, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. I just stare at it like, what the Then, as if on cue, it moves inside my room, dragging the plastic bottom on the ground about half a foot, floats up about half a foot, then fast forward about a foot very slowly, and plops the weight back down on the ground. Then it just sits there, doing nothing. And a few minutes later, it would repeat it. All this time I'm sitting there horrified. The balloon continues to move toward me and my bed until it plops down right at the edge of my bed and kind of leans in right in my face. I jumped up and back the way up, searching for a logical explanation for what I just observed. My dad tells a story, and I will do the best to recall the details, but my dad was 12 or so and had a cousin that was 8 or so. My dad's aunt had driven down from Louisville for the weekend to visit with the family and brought the kid with her. My dad said that when the kid arrived, he told him that he'd had a bad dream the night before, that he was in a coffin and he couldn't get out. My dad told him not to be silly, and my grandfather and dad were going to the feed mill to pick up a load of grain, and he rode with them. On the way, they passed the church graveyard, and my dad's cousin asked my grandfather if he were in a coffin, would he be buried there? My grandfather laughed and said, maybe one of these days, but that's a long, long time off, so you shouldn't worry about it. They get to the load of feed at the mill and head back to the house. The next day on Sunday, they get up and go to the church, and in Sunday school, they had all the kids together, and my dad said his cousin asked what it was like to be with Jesus, and the teacher tried to continue on with her lesson plan, but then he started to cry and said he needed to know. So she changed and talked about what they thought heaven would be like. After church, he was crossing the road to the parking lot and was hit by a car and killed. My dad and grandfather will say it's almost like he knew he was going to die then. Gives me the shivers a bit. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family decided to go on summer vacation up to a little island in Maine. We rented out this old house on the water. From what I can remember, there were about 6 or 7 other houses on the island. Everyone else who lived there was in their 60s and years of age, except for this mid-40s gentleman who fished on the water. His name was Bubba, I shit you not. Anyway, the island was exceedingly creepy. Everything about the house was really old. Every piece of furniture from that house was probably over 60 years old. Not to mention there was no television, running water was used through a well and a pump, and hundreds of books and pictures in the house dated through at least the last 100 years. To make things more pants-shittingly creepy, there was an infestation of rats in the backyard that would run around at night. Also, whenever we made dinner, all of the old ladies who lived in the houses on the island somehow knew and would show up and give us blueberry pie and fresh-caught bluefish. It was really creepy. It was as if everyone knew what we were doing and when we did it. Long story short, a few nights into our stay at this house, my parents started hearing singing at night. They said that it would start and stop for about 20 to 30 minutes. The first few nights they didn't think much of it. The following day, they asked around, but they couldn't find the source of the singing. The second to last night on our week-long stay, my whole family heard the singing, and we went outside to find out what was going on. It sounded like a choir of children. It really freaked all of us out, but we didn't want it to ruin the trip. It was just very mysterious. The next day, my dad starts checking out some of the old photos and books in the library, and finds this old scrapbook dated to the early 1920s. The house we were living in was once an old schoolhouse, and there was a picture of the boys' choir. We all shat bracks. Left the next day. The house I lived in before this one was beyond haunted. Though we never physically saw anything when we first moved in, we were redoing the floor in the kitchen and the master bedroom. My husband at the time would leave for work, and I'd be left alone in the house with no furniture, no floors, and nothing to do. I can't explain it, but alone in that bedroom at night, I felt the most mind-numbing fear you could ever think of. I could not stay in that room. I bolted out of the house at 4 a.m. after he'd left and slept in my car with my dog until daylight, and that was just the first experience. A week or so later, the house was finished. We moved all the furniture in, and I began sleeping in my real bedroom across the house. A friend and her husband moved in with us, and the boys went away for training for 2 weeks. They were U.S. Marines, leaving us girls to fend for ourselves. The first night, she comes into my bedroom asking to sleep with me because her bed was shaking. I laughed it off, thinking she was probably just sleepwalking, and made room. No more than 5 minutes later, my bed starts shaking like an earthquake. We stayed completely frozen and waited for it to stop. The next night, same thing. Night after night, our beds would shake, and we would be terrified. Her bedroom was the one I had slept in when we first moved in. In the room, I felt the mind-numbing fear. She refused to sleep in there alone. She said she'd hear something like fingernails in the closet, scratching from the ceiling all the way to the floor. Another night, she went to sleep with her closet door closed and her fan off. She woke up an hour later to find the door open and the fan on. Another night, she was in my bathroom and I was in my bedroom with both lights cut. We figured, okay, old house, power outage. We made our way down the hallway and started flipping switches. Every other light in the house worked except the 2 rooms we were in. I called my father, an electrician, asking for help. Everything was working perfectly, yet still no lights. After 20 minutes of arguing with my father that we were not going back into that room, we finally walked back into my room when both lights magically came on. We set up a video camera one night around Halloween of last year, hoping to capture something. We positioned it on my kitchen table, pointing down the hallway to my bedroom. The first video had shadows crossing the walls when no one was around, and the picture would randomly distort and become fuzzy, then become clear again. We fully charged the camera and set it up to run for the next 4 hours. In the video, you can see my ex-husband and I walk down the hall, go into our bedroom, and when we turn off the light, the video stops. The battery was dead after 6 minutes of videos and a full charge. Months later, we were having a bonfire with a bunch of my ex-husband's friends. The boys all came in the house to grab some food and beer. Clark was the first out the door and came screaming back into the house. Everyone just kind of stared at him like he was crazy and asked what had happened. He swore up and down he'd seen 3 men in Civil War uniforms standing around the fire. Clark certainly wasn't drunk, but he was scared out of his mind. Activity slowed down after that, and just little things here and there would happen. Whatever it was, it got used to us and turned from scaring us to playing jokes on the new people who came over to spend the night. Their things would go missing, the couch or bed they were sleeping on would shake, but my bed never did again. It almost became a joke around the house. We never did see anything though.